In this video tutorial we are going to have a look at how to do binary multiplication. Now one of the things that we're not going to look at in this video is binary addition, which is part of the steps of doing multiplication. So the precursor to this video is, if you're not really sure on how to do binary addition, please can you address that first, watch the video tutorial on that before we have a look at multiplying two unsigned binary integers together. So there's two phases that you go through. There's the comparison stage in binary multiplication, and then there's the addition stage. So we compare values against each other first of all, and then we add them together to give us our final result. So in this particular example here, where I've got 27 times by 3, which is going to give me an answer of 81, I'm going to compare the bottom row, so this 1 and 1 here, against each of the values on the top row. Now there's a few rules you need to be aware of. When I multiply a 1 and a 1, I get a 1. When I multiply a 1 and a 0, I get a 0. Conversely, the same thing goes if I have a 0 and a 1, then I have a 0. And if I have a 0 times a 0, then I have a 0 as well. So we're going to work our way through this. So the first thing to do is I'm going to compare this value here against the entire top row 1 in turn. I'm going to place the answers just here. So a 1 and a 1 gives me 1, and that's that one done. A 1 and a 1 gives me 1, so I place that there. A 1 and a 0 gives me 0. A 1 and a 1 gives me 1, and a 1 and a 1 gives me 1 just there. So that's the entirety of the top row sorted out. So let's just switch over now and we'll do a different comparison on the next row. So we're going to do, this time, we're going to compare this value here. Now, because this is under the 2's column, so it's a double placeholder over, I always place a 0 in the gaps that fill the corresponding placeholder value. So for instance, if this number was 111, which would be 7, on the next row down I'd actually have 2 zeros because it would incrementally work its way along. So this time I'm going to go 1 and 1, which gives me a 1. I'm going to go 1 and 1, which gives me 1. 1 and 0, which gives me 0. Let's just score these off. 1 and 1, which gives me 1, and then 1 and 1, which gives me 1 as well. So there we go. So there's me scoring those off, and I can see what I've got here. So now I'm left with the situation where all I need to do is add these values together. So if I have a 1 and a 0, then I have a 1. If I have a 1 and a 1, then I have a 0, carry 1. 1 and 1, 0, carry 1. 1 and 1, 0, carry 1. 3 ones gives me 1, carry 1. 1 and 1 gives me 0, carry 1. So I then have an answer of 64 plus 16, which gives me 80, and I have a 1, which gives me 81, or 27 times by 3 is going to give me an answer of 81, which is the correct one in this case. All right, so what we're going to do now is we'll move on to another example, so you can see this. If you're not sure on how we go about doing this, then hopefully this will make a lot more sense after we've done this particular one. So what we've got here now is we've got an answer, or we've got a value of, we're going to go 16, a 4, a 2 and a 1, which is going to be 23, and we're going to multiply that by 5. So 23 multiplied by 5 should give me an answer of 115. So I'm going to start with this one value here, and I'm going to compare it against everything on the top row. So a 1 times a 1 gives me a 1. Then I've got a 1 times a 1, which gives me a 1. 1 times a 1, which gives me a 1. 1 times a 0 gives me a 0, and 1 times a 1 gives me a 1. So that's that one done. Let's jump over. Let's do our next row down. So based on the previous slide, we're going to place a 0 just here, and now we're going to compare these values. So a 0 times a 1 is going to be a 0. A 0 times a 1 is going to be a 0. 0 times a 1 is going to be 0. You're getting the idea now. 0 times a 0 is 0, and 0 times 1 is 0. We're then going to do our next line down, and we've got a 1 just here. So we're going to go 1 times 1, which is going to be 1. Sorry, we have to place 2 zeros rather in here first of all, because we're under this column here. So 1 times a 1 is a 1. 1 times a 1 is a 1. 1 times a 1 is a 1. 1 times a 0 is a 0. And a 1 times a 1 is a 1. So now we're going to add these together. So 1 and 2 zeros is going to be 1. 1 and 2 zeros is going to be 1. 2 ones are going to be 0, carry 1. 2 ones are going to be 0, carry 1. I've got 3 ones now, so I'm going to go 1, carry 1. Got a 1 here from the carry variant, I've got a 1 just here. So my final answer is going to be a 64 and a 32. I'm going to have a 16, it's looking good so far, 112 plus 2 plus 1 gives me an answer of 115. So what you're now going to do is you're going to have a look at doing the next couple, and here's one for you to try. So we've got 70, so going to be 79, is it? 72, 6, 8, 9, yeah, multiplied by 3. Pause the video now, have a go at it, and then I'll take you through the solution. Okay, so dealing with these answers here, we're going to first of all compare this this one against the top row, which I now know anything basically a 1 on the bottom row indicates it's just going to be replicated up on the top row. We're going to go 1, 1, 1, 4 1s in fact, 2 zeros and a 1, and then I'm going to place a 0 down here because I've now compared that one. I'm now going to compare this one against the top row, and it's going to be basically a repeat again, so I'm going to go for 4 1s, 00, and then 1. And then my final one is going to be all zeros, so I can just write out a load of zeros here, and in fact, because I'm going to do it correctly, I'm going to exceed this grid space because there should be an extra 0 just there as well. So now I'm going to add these together. So let me change the pen colour for that, it's a bit easier to see. So I'm going to have a 1, I'm going to have a 0, carry 1, 1, carry 1, 1, let me just check that actually, 1, 0, carry 1, 1, carry 1, 1, carry 1, 0, carry 1, we're going to have a 1 here, a 1 here, and a 1 here. So let's just bring the calculator up and just add that together. So we're going to go 128 plus 64 plus 32 plus 8 plus 4 plus 1 to give us an answer of 237. Let's just check that then. So we got 72, 76, 78, 79 times by 3, 237. We are spot on. So hopefully you got that right. We're going to have a look at our next example, and I'd like to have a go at doing this again as well. So here you go. Pause the video, and then I'll take you through the answers very shortly. Now, one thing to note about this is I've added additional placeholder values in because this is going to be quite a large number that you're going to have to calculate. In fact, I believe it's 207 multiplied by 7. So that should be an interesting one for you to do. So pause the video, and then I'll have a go at doing it with you. Okay, so let's compare the row values again. What we can see here, this is going to be a replication because 1 here is just going to be compared against the top row. So I'm going to go 1, 1, 1, 1, 0, 0, 1, 1. And then on the next row down, I'm going to increase by 0, and it's going to be a repeat again. And then on the third row down, 2 zeros this time. Okay, so this one's going to start getting a little bit more complicated. So let's have a look at this then. So change my pen colour just to make it a bit more obvious as what I'm doing. Okay, so a 1 in here. I'm going to have a 0, carry 1. Now I've got 4 1s here. Now when you have 4 1s, this is an additional rule that you have in binary addition. You do 0, carry 2 because essentially you pair them up. So 4 1s become a 0, carry 2 over. And now on this one, I have 5 1s. So this becomes, well, 1 is left because it's an odd number, and then I'm left with 4 1s, so that becomes carry 2 over again. I've now got 4 here, so it's going to be 0, carry 2 here. Then I've got 3 1s, so I'm going to go 1, carry 1. Then I've got 2 1s, so I'm going to go 0, carry 1. I've got 3 1s again, 1, carry 1. 3 1s, so 1, carry 1, and then that's going to be 0, carry 1, just over like so. And this bit here is quite new. That might be unfamiliar. It very rarely ever comes up, but it's worth kind of knowing about. That's the rule that would happen in that situation. Let's go in and let's just do the calculator on that. And the answer that we're looking for, 192, 200, 207 times by 7. So we're after 1,449. So let's see whether we get it. 1024 plus 256 plus 128 plus 32 plus 8 plus 1, 1449. Spot on.